The morning air was crisp, and the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured drive. A seemingly normal day for Marcus Hale, CEO of Haletech Systems, who was returning from his early morning jog. His Nike sneakers slapped rhythmically against the pavement, sweat still glistening on his forehead as he neared the entrance to his mansion. It was his home, a place he had designed from the ground up, a testament to his hard work and perseverance. The gate, tall and imposing, stood ahead, the only barrier between him and the sanctuary he had built. But something wasn't right. As he approached the security post, he noticed a woman standing by the gate, her eyes fixed on him with a look of indifference, as if he were just another face in the crowd. She was sharply dressed in a white blazer and heels, standing tall and rigid, the picture of authority. A radio clipped to her waist buzzed quietly as her fingers hovered near the control panel. Her presence was commanding, yet the air around her felt tense, thick with something Marcus couldn't quite place. "Sir, delivery access is closed," the woman's voice rang out, sharp and cold, cutting through the quiet morning. She didn't look at him directly, her eyes scanning the gate controls, as if she didn't even need to acknowledge him. Her words were crisp, clean, and devoid of any warmth. It wasn't the words themselves that threw Marcus off. It was the way she spoke, as if he didn't belong, as if he were just another delivery man, a mere inconvenience at her post. Marcus stopped in his tracks, glancing at her briefly. He was used to being treated with respect, to people acknowledging his presence before him. But here, in this moment, there was none of that. No recognition, no warmth, no acknowledgement of who he was. Just a stranger in his own home, standing outside the very gates he had designed. His posture remained calm, his expression neutral. He was a CEO, but in this moment, it felt as though none of that mattered. The woman's gaze flickered up briefly, appraising him. Her eyes lingered just a little too long on his athletic wear. A black sweat-streaked t-shirt, track pants, and no watch or suit to mark his status. To her, he was just another jogger. But to Marcus, this wasn't just any gate. This was his domain, his sanctuary, the place where he had poured years of blood, sweat, and tears. And yet here he stood, being denied entry, without so much as a question. "Delivery access is closed," she repeated, her tone unwavering. "Use the visitors lane down the hill." Her words hung in the air, final, as if she were dismissing him with a flick of the wrist. Marcus felt a pulse of irritation. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This was something else, something deeper, something personal. This wasn't just a security protocol failure. This was a subtle challenge to his identity, to his very presence. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a moment, letting the silence between them stretch out, as if testing the very air. Then, his voice broke the quiet. "I live here." The words came out low, but with an edge of certainty that hung in the air longer than necessary. It wasn't an argument, it was a statement. He wasn't asking for permission. He was reminding her of his place here, but it seemed to have no effect. She glanced up, her lips curling ever so slightly, not in a smile, but in the closest thing to a disdainful smirk. Her eyes narrowed, just a bit, as if she were scanning for something. Some sort of proof, some identification that could validate his claim. But Marcus didn't carry any ID. He didn't need to. This was his home, the life he had built. Every stone, every railing, all were his creation. The house behind him, the one that towered over the gate, was a reflection of his. Legusi. His name was engraved in every corner of that mansion. Yet it didn't matter. "Step back, sir," she said, her voice now colder, tinged with the kind of authority that tried to match his calm. But it faltered, just for a second. She didn't realize it yet, but Marcus's presence alone was enough to shatter the illusion of control she thought she held. For a fleeting moment, Marcus paused, his mind shifting. This wasn't about the gate. This wasn't about the security system. It was about something much deeper, a subtle form of judgment based on nothing more than appearances. A glance at his sweatpants, at his casual demeanor, and this woman had decided who he was. But Marcus wasn't just anyone. His stance didn't waver. The tension in the air only seemed to grow heavier, but he remained still, rooted in his authority, calm yet unwavering. He was, after all, the man who had built this place, and he would not let anyone, not today, make him feel like he didn't belong. Would she step aside, or would she learn who was truly in charge? The air around the gate grew thick with an unspoken tension as Marcus remained rooted to the spot, his eyes locked onto the security guard. Ava Monroe stood across from him, her posture rigid, her gaze unyielding, as if daring him to challenge her authority. The silence between them stretched, an awkward, palpable moment that seemed to hover over the space like a weight. Marcus stood tall, his calm demeanor an unspoken testament to the years he had spent building not just his business, but a life that others only dreamed of. His presence in the gate's frame was undeniable, yet it was as though Ava refused to see him for what he truly was. To her, he was just another person trying to gain access to a place where they didn't belong. She shifted her weight slightly, a faint flicker of impatience passing over her features as she studied him. There was no recognition in her eyes, no acknowledgement of who he was or what he had accomplished. It was as though, in her mind, Marcus was just another black man in sweatpants trying to infiltrate a place he had no right to be. She glanced at the control panel, her fingers brushing over the buttons, as though searching for a way to shut him out completely. "I told you, sir, delivery access is closed. You need to use the visitor's lane down the hill. Please step back," she repeated, her voice more insistent now, tinged with an edge of finality. Marcus didn't flinch. He remained still, his gaze unwavering, the calm composure that had gotten him through countless board meetings and high-stakes negotiations, now guiding him through this unexpected confrontation. But the more Ava spoke, the more he could feel. His own frustration began to build. The more she dismissed him, the more his thoughts burned with the realization that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something deeper, a challenge to who he was and what he had earned. "I live here," Marcus said again, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. His words hung in the air, a simple yet powerful statement that should have been enough to settle the matter. But Ava didn't seem to hear it. Instead, she stared at him with a look that told him she didn't believe him. She didn't think he belonged. She leaned forward slightly, her hand still resting on the console as she raised her voice just enough for the radio at her waist to catch it. "Unit 3, I have a male attempting to access the property without ID. No visible identification. Non-compliant tone. Possible squatter situation. Send backup." The word squatter dropped into the conversation like a stone into water, ripples of tension spreading outward. Marcus's chest tightened, and for the first time since stepping up to the gate, his eyes narrowed. The audacity to call him a squatter in his own home, a place he had built, designed, and poured everything into. His heart thudded in his chest, but outwardly, his expression remained neutral. Unfazed, he was not going to let this woman, or anyone else for that matter, take away what was rightfully his. "Squatter," he repeated softly, his voice just above a whisper. The word tasted bitter in his mouth. It was as though his very identity, his life's work, was being reduced to nothing more than a suspicion. A misunderstanding based solely on how he looked and what he was wearing. Sweatpants, a t-shirt. No car, no suit. It was as if none of his accomplishments mattered because he didn't fit the image she had in her mind. Ava, seemingly oblivious to the growing anger in his voice, stepped back slightly and looked at her colleagues, who had gathered. Behind her, a few with their arms crossed, others sipping coffee. They looked at Marcus with the same skepticism that had started to creep into Ava's gaze. It was as if they were all silently assessing him, weighing his worth based on the way he looked, rather than the history that stood behind him. "Who's this?" one of the younger officers asked, a man in a beige vest who hadn't said anything until now. His eyes scanned Marcus's t-shirt, as if expecting it to suddenly turn into something more appropriate for someone of Marcus's stature. "I'm a resident," Marcus said, his voice now carrying a hint of frustration. He wasn't trying to escalate the situation, but he couldn't help the sting of being questioned in his own home. Ava's lips curled slightly, a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "You're a resident? And I'm a princess?" she retorted, her words dripping with sarcasm. Marcus's brow furrowed. It wasn't just her tone that bothered him, it was the way she dismissed his claim without even the slightest attempt at verification. It was clear to him now. This wasn't about protocol. This wasn't about rules. This was about the biases and assumptions she had, and the way she thought the world should be ordered. He was a man in sweatpants, standing in front of a gate that he had helped design, and to her, that meant he didn't belong. "I told you. I live here," Marcus repeated, his voice growing firm. His calmness had shifted now, replaced with a sense of quiet but undeniable authority. His eyes didn't leave hers. He wasn't angry, he wasn't shouting, but there was something in his gaze now, something that she hadn't expected, something that shook her from her own calculated composure. But Ava wasn't ready to concede. She leaned back toward the control panel, her fingers twitching near the override button. "You're not cleared for entry, and until you verify yourself, I can't let you pass," she said, her words measured, as though trying to assert control over the situation. The young officer in the vest was eyeing Marcus again, his brows furrowed. "You sure this guy lives here?" Marcus felt the question like a punch. His identity, his presence, reduced to a question, a lingering doubt. He could feel the weight of the assumptions pressing against him, the bias growing thicker with every word. "I don't need to prove myself to you," Marcus said, his voice cold but composed. It was a simple statement, but it was enough. Ava looked at him, her eyes narrowing, but this time, Marcus could see the flicker of uncertainty. He wasn't going to back down. The gate buzzed once again, the soft sound doing little to break the mounting tension in the air. Marcus stood unmoving, feeling the weight of every second that passed between him and the woman in front of him. Ava Monroe's cold gaze never wavered, her eyes scanning his figure with the precision of someone who had made up her mind before even hearing his story. His clothes, sweatpants, a Nike t-shirt, no watch, no fancy accessories. All spoke against him in her mind. Marcus felt it, the invisible barrier, the assumptions, the biases. They weren't shouted, they weren't even overt, but they were there, clear as day, in every word Ava spoke, in the way she didn't look at him like a man, but as an outsider, an intruder. He knew it wasn't just about the gate. It wasn't just about the delivery access. It was about who he was, or rather, who she thought he was. The young officer in the vest, who had been watching the interaction unfold with growing discomfort, shifted his stance, as if unsure whether to back up his superior or step in to de-escalate the situation. The other guard, still sipping his coffee, glanced at Marcus, but quickly looked away, as if afraid to make eye contact with the man he was supposed to be guarding against. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back," Ava said again, her voice slightly more forceful now, tinged with an edge of impatience. "I'm not going to ask you again." Marcus didn't budge. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. The tension in the air was thick, like the slow-building moment before a storm, where everything is perfectly still and quiet, except for the electric hum of uncertainty in the atmosphere. He could feel it in his bones now, the weight of what was happening. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't just about getting access to his home. This was about something deeper. Ava's refusal to believe that he belonged here. The way she kept questioning his identity wasn't just about her professional duty. It was something more personal, a challenge to him as a man, to everything he had worked for, to the life he had built with blood, sweat, and tears. And then, in that moment, as Ava's voice grew more insistent, and the tension built between them, Marcus realized something. This wasn't a battle over access to a property. This was a battle for respect, a fight against the biases that people like Ava held without even realizing it. He could feel it in the air. She wasn't looking at him like a person. She wasn't seeing the CEO, the founder, the man who had built empires. She was seeing him as just another man in sweatpants, just another person who didn't fit the image of success she had in her mind. Marcus exhaled slowly, taking a step forward, just enough to cross the line that Ava had marked, the imaginary boundary that seemed to hold so much power for her. The gate sensor buzzed again, the red light flashing once more, but Marcus wasn't looking at the sensor. He wasn't focused on the gate at all. He was looking at Ava. His gaze was steady, unwavering, like a mountain that wouldn't shift no matter how hard the wind blew. "Step back, sir," Ava repeated, this time more forcefully, but the words fell flat in the air. She was trying to maintain control, but the harder she pushed, the more she revealed the cracks in her own authority. "I've already told you," Marcus said, his voice calm, his tone low but unshakable. "I live here." Ava's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Marcus saw the flicker of uncertainty in them, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile, attempting to keep her cool. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp, "you need to step back. This is private property, and you're trespassing." A wave of frustration rippled through Marcus, but he contained it, as he always did. He'd been through worse. He'd been questioned, undermined, dismissed countless times before. But today was different. Today, in this moment, he wasn't just going to explain himself. He wasn't going to beg for entry. He wasn't going to beg for anyone's permission. Ava's posture had shifted again. She was now standing a little straighter, her hand resting firmly on the radio at her waist, her gaze still trying to maintain control. But Marcus didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that power wasn't about shouting, about flexing muscles, about making noise. Power, true power, was in stillness. It was in presence. "I don't need to prove myself to you," he said quietly, the words simple but piercing. For a brief second, the words hung in the air, like a challenge. Ava's grip on her radio tightened, her fingers trembling slightly, and her lips parted as if to argue. But the argument never came. The words didn't need to be spoken, because Marcus's presence was enough. His calmness, his stillness, his sheer belief in himself was like a force that couldn't be denied. The young officer in the vest glanced over at Ava, unsure of what to do next. The tension between the two had reached its peak, but Marcus didn't give in. He wasn't going to shrink. Not today. Not ever again. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. A history where men like him were often overlooked, underestimated, or erased entirely. "I'm not asking for permission," Marcus said, his voice carrying just the right amount of edge. "I'm telling you, I live here." Ava's jaw clenched, her expression hardening. But Marcus could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the realization that perhaps she had made a grave error. He wasn't just a man in sweatpants. He wasn't just a jogger trying to force his way in. He was someone who had built this place. Every stone, every railing, every inch of this property had been his decision. This wasn't just a gate. This wasn't just a security post. This was his legacy, his life. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said, his voice steady, and for the first time, Ava's posture faltered. She took a small step back, just enough to show that she was considering what he had said, but not enough to admit defeat. The standoff continued, but Marcus could feel the shift in the air. The power wasn't with Ava anymore. It was with him. The moment wasn't over yet. But Marcus knew one thing for certain. He had already won. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ava stood a few paces away, her eyes narrowed, her hand still resting on her radio, her body tense and ready to escalate the situation if needed. The two security guards who had emerged behind her, one still sipping his coffee, and the other, a younger officer in a beige vest, shifting uneasily, watched the scene unfold with varying degrees of discomfort. Marcus, however, remained perfectly still. His eyes never left Ava's. There was no fear, no uncertainty, just an unshakable calm that seemed to radiate from him like an invisible force. It was as if the world itself had slowed around him. The hum of the gate's sensor, the rustle of the leaves in the garden behind him, the chirping of distant birds, all seemed distant, almost muffled, compared to the quiet certainty with which he stood. Ava hesitated, her voice wavering for just a moment before she spoke again. "You need to leave," she said, her tone no longer as firm as before. "You can't just waltz in here because you say you live here. We've got protocols." Marcus took a small step forward, his movements deliberate, controlled, as if he were calculating every action. His gaze never faltered, and in the quiet that followed, Ava's voice was the only thing that broke the silence. "You're not going through?" she added, though the edge in her voice seemed to be weakening. For a brief moment, Marcus wondered if she was trying to break him down, waiting for him to show frustration or anger. But he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, his eyes flicked toward the security control panel beside her, where he could see the little green lights blinking, signaling that the system was still locked down. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The simple act was so casual, so unremarkable, yet it felt like a turning point. The officers behind Ava, who had been standing stiff and silent, took notice. Even Ava, with her tight-lipped smile, couldn't help but glance at the phone. Without a word, Marcus dialed a number. The sound of the phone ringing filled the brief silence, and Ava's eyes narrowed even further. She knew something was coming, but she couldn't quite place it. She wasn't ready for what would happen next. Finally, the call connected. A voice, cool and professional, echoed from Marcus's phone speaker. "Carla, it's Marcus. Activate Protocol 7. Override the security system. Verify ownership and access logs for the property." The voice on the other end, calm and efficient, responded almost immediately. "Confirmed, Mr. Hall, executing now." For a split second, there was nothing but a quiet hum from the speakers. Then, the soft click of the gate unlocking was audible. Marcus didn't even flinch. Ava's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, there was a flicker of doubt in her demeanor. She turned quickly to her fellow guards, her lips parting as if she was about to say something, but no words came out. The younger officer in the vest raised an eyebrow, unsure of what had just happened. His gaze shifted back to Marcus, and then to Ava, waiting for her to make sense of it all. "Your system just unlocked," the officer murmured, almost to himself. Ava shook her head slightly, trying to regain control, but her words stumbled. "That can't be right. It's a glitch, a mistake." Her voice was shaky now, and Marcus couldn't help but notice the crack in her previously unyielding demeanor. Marcus, still as calm as ever, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood there, letting the truth of the moment settle in. His eyes met Ava's again, and this time, there was no anger, no frustration in his expression, only the quiet authority of a man who knew who he was and what he had earned. "Is it a mistake?" Marcus said, his voice low but unmistakable in its certainty. "Or is it the truth?" Behind Ava, the younger officer muttered something under his breath, his eyes still scanning the control panel. "A system override," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The tension in the air was palpable now, as if the entire scene had shifted. What had once been a power struggle was now a moment of revelation. Ava stood frozen, her gaze flickering between Marcus and the control panel, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't expected the calm CEO, the jogger in sweatpants, to hold this much power. this much control over the situation. Just then, a voice from behind Marcus, belonging to a bystander who had been watching the exchange unfold, spoke up. "Wait a minute," the voice called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Isn't that Marcus Hall, the CEO of Hall Tech? I've delivered to this place before. That's him, I'm sure of it." The words fell into the moment like a bombshell. Ava turned quickly toward the bystander, her eyes wide, her lips parted in shock, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked back at Marcus, as if trying to process everything that had just been said. Marcus's name, the name she had only heard in passing. In boardrooms, on news articles, in tech conferences, now stood before her, in full, undeniable reality. For the briefest of moments, Ava's composure faltered completely. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she finally spoke, her voice a little less certain. "Marcus Hall," she muttered, as if saying the name made it real. "IDIDN. Single quotes, T. ... Her voice trailed off, and it was as if the weight of her mistake hit her all at once. She had spent so long assuming, so long dismissing him as an outsider, a trespasser, but the truth had come crashing down around her. "Did you think the system would lie?" Marcus's voice was steady, still unflinching. "Did you think I'd just walk away? Did you think I didn't belong?" Ava didn't answer. She couldn't. The silence that followed was thick with her own realization. She had misjudged him, and she had done it publicly. The moment of truth had arrived, and she wasn't the one in control anymore. The gate buzzed again, its lights flashing green, and with it, the power dynamic had shifted entirely. The buzz of the gate unlocking echoed in the tense silence, but it wasn't enough to break the stillness in the air. Ava stood motionless, her hand still gripping the radio at her waist, her lips pressed together in frustration. Her eyes never left Marcus, but there was something different now, something that had shifted. She had always held power in her world, the kind of power that came from enforcing rules and maintaining control. She had never questioned it, but here, in this moment, that power felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Marcus had undone everything she thought she knew about authority, about who should be in charge, about who belonged, but she wasn't ready to let it go. "Step back." "Mr. Hall," Ava said again, her voice sharp, though it lacked the certainty it had carried moments ago. "I'm not letting you through without verification. The system might have unlocked, but that doesn't change anything. I need proper documentation before I let you in." Her words were calculated, trying to reassert control in the only way she knew how. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stood there, calm, his body language relaxed, but firm, as if every ounce of the tension that Ava was feeling had been drained from him. Marcus's gaze was steady, his voice even quieter this time, yet it carried an undeniable weight. "I've told you twice now, I live here, and I'm not going to keep proving myself to someone who refuses to listen." Ava flinched at the underlying accusation in his words, her jaw tightening. She was caught in a trap of her own making. She had underestimated him, and now, as the revelation of his identity hung in the air like an undeniable truth, she found herself doubling down, unwilling to admit that she had misjudged him. "I don't care who you are," she shot back, the words coming out harsher than she intended. "This is private property. I'm the one in charge here, and you're not going to walk through this gate without following the rules." There was a dangerous edge to her tone now, a thinly veiled threat. Ava wasn't just defending the rules, she was defending her authority, something that, up until now, had been unquestioned. And though she could feel the cracks in her composure growing, she refused to back down. She wouldn't let a man in sweatpants walk all over her. Marcus remained unmoved. His eyes never left hers as he stepped forward, just a fraction closer. He wasn't towering over her. He wasn't raising his voice. But there was something about the way he moved that made Ava instinctively take a small step back, though she quickly caught herself. "Do you really think this is about the rules?" Marcus's voice was low, calm, but there was an edge of challenge in it now. It's not about the gate. It's not about the system. It's about you and your need to hold power. Your need to make someone like me prove my worth. Ava's face flushed with anger, but she didn't let it show. She straightened her back, drawing on every last ounce of pride and control she had left. She wasn't going to let him break her down. Not here, not now. I'm doing my job, she snapped, her words sharp. You may own this property, but that doesn't mean you can bypass security whenever you want. I don't care who you are. No one gets special treatment here. Marcus took another step. Closer. This isn't about special treatment. This is about respect. About understanding that I don't need to prove myself to you or anyone else. But you need to prove that you can see beyond your own assumptions. That you can see a man standing here, not as a threat, but as someone who belongs. Ava's expression faltered for a moment. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. The longer Marcus stood there, unshaken and unwavering, the more her anger began to mix with uncertainty. You're not going to get away with this, she said through gritted teeth. You can't just waltz in here, and we're not backing down. I've been doing this job for years, and I've never let anyone walk all over me. Marcus's gaze softened slightly, but there was no less power behind it. It's not about walking over anyone, Ava. It's about knowing when to stop fighting a losing battle. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Ava's eyes flickered with doubt. The power that she had clung to so tightly, the authority she had built her world around, seemed to crumble at the edges. Marcus wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't demanding respect. But his presence, his quiet confidence, had already taken control of the situation. It wasn't just his words. It was how he stood there, calm, composed, unshaken. Ava tried to hold on. She reached for her radio again, but this time, her hand trembled slightly, betraying the fear that was beginning to creep in. Unit 7, respond, she called, her voice faltering. Escalation at Gate 6. Possible impersonator. Contact LAPD. But this time, her words didn't have the same weight. The radio crackled back, but it was a voice she didn't expect. One of the officers, the one who had been sipping his coffee earlier. Ava, he said, his voice hesitant. You might want to see this. Ava's head whipped around to face him, but she already knew what was coming. The confirmation that Marcus Hall, the man who had been standing before her in sweatpants, wasn't just some intruder. He was the man who had built this community, the man whose name she had never thought to question. Marcus's eyes shifted briefly to the officer who had spoken, then back to Ava. He didn't need to say anything. The quiet authority in his gaze was enough. The officer's voice trembled as he read aloud. Marcus Hall, CEO of Haltech Systems, founder and majority shareholder of Westridge Estates Management, which owns this property. Ava's face drained of color as the realization hit her like a wave. She stood there, stunned, unable to say anything for a moment. The truth of the situation had unfolded, and with it, her grip on power began to slip away completely. For the first time, Marcus spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I'm not asking for permission. I'm simply asking you to step aside. The finality of his words landed like a hammer. Ava opened her mouth, but no words came. Her hands trembled as they hovered over the control panel, but she didn't press the button. She didn't make the call, because at that moment, Ava Monroe knew. She was OUTMATCHED, that the moment of truth had arrived, and the air was thick with the realization of what had just unfolded. Ava stood there, her posture rigid, but beneath the surface, her mind raced. The security team, once firmly positioned behind her, now stood in stunned silence, uncertain of what would happen next. The tension in the air was unbearable, the weight of Marcus's quiet authority pressing down on them all. Ava's eyes darted between the two officers, the younger guard still fumbling with his tablet, and the other one, who had been sipping his coffee earlier. Their faces mirrored her own disbelief. The shift in power too sudden and too profound to ignore. It was as if, in one moment, the world they had known, where they held authority and made the rules, had come crashing down around them. The CEO, the man in sweatpants, the jogger, at his own gate, had just dismantled everything they thought they understood about power and control. But now, Marcus stood before them, his calm demeanor never wavering, his presence undeniable. There was no anger in him, there was no gloating, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet fire that told them all they were no longer in charge. Ava's hands hovered near the radio, but this time there was no command that followed. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her, suffocating her ability to think clearly. For the first time in years, her position was no longer certain. Her identity as the person in control, the one who had the power to make decisions, was slipping away. Marcus's voice broke through the stillness, low and measured, but carrying a gravity that none of them could ignore. I'm making this very clear. The entire security team is being reassigned, he said, his words deliberate and final. Ava's stomach dropped. The reality of what he was saying hit her with the force of 1,000 bricks. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. The shock of it all left her speechless. She hadn't anticipated this. She hadn't even considered the possibility that her actions, her refusal to listen, her arrogance, could lead to such a swift and decisive end. The younger officer in the vest looked from Ava to Marcus, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. Wait, what? Are you serious? He asked, his voice shaky, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Marcus's eyes never left Ava as he spoke again, his voice unyielding. I don't make threats, I make decisions, and I'm making one now. All of you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. The company has already been notified. The words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the air, pressing down on everyone in earshot. Ava felt the ground shift beneath her, her authority slipping away like sand through her fingers. She had thought that by holding her position, by enforcing the rules, she was in control. But in that moment, it was clear that she had never been in control at all. The realization hit her hard, harder than anything she had ever faced before. She had underestimated Marcus. She had assumed, based on his appearance, that he was just another person who didn't belong. But she was wrong. And now, the consequences were unfolding before her in real time. Her grip on her career, on her life, was slipping. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the officers behind her, their faces blank but their eyes wide with the realization that they, too, were caught in the wake of her mistake. One of them, the officer who had been standing with his coffee earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. You can't just do that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's protocol. We can't just be let go like this. Marcus's eyes shifted toward the officer, his gaze sharp but still calm. There is no protocol when someone refuses to do their job properly. You failed to do your duty when it mattered most. You followed her lead instead of using your own judgment. And now, there will be consequences. The officer stood frozen, unable to find any words in response. Ava, too, stood there, staring at Marcus as if she were waiting for him to back down, to show some hint of mercy. But that wasn't Marcus's way. He wasn't here to play games. He wasn't here to let them off the hook because they were sorry, or because they were confused. This was about accountability. You may have been following orders, Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. But you were also following your own assumptions, and that's a problem. That's the kind of thing that gets people hurt. That's the kind of thing that ruins trust, and I won't let it slide. Ava could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had thought she could control the situation. She had thought that her position as the security manager would protect her. But Marcus's words cut through her like a blade, and for the first time in her career, she felt small. She felt powerless. Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come. What could she say? How could she explain herself when everything she had done, every decision she had made, had been wrong? She had made a mistake that had cost her everything. Her career, her reputation, her control. It was all slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The young officer, still standing off to the side, shifted uncomfortably. "What now?" he asked, his voice tentative. He was looking to Marcus, waiting for him to tell them what to do next. Marcus didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. He had already asserted his control, his power, and it was clear to everyone present that there was no going back. Ava stood there, her hands still hovering over the radio, but it was no use. Her authority was gone, and she knew it. Marcus turned his gaze back to the gate, his eyes scanning the property that had been his home for so long. There was no rush in his movements, no satisfaction in his expression. He was simply doing what needed to be done. The power had shifted completely. "I've made the call," Marcus said, his voice low and final. "You'll be receiving your severance shortly, and your access will be terminated. I don't expect to see any of you here again." The words were simple, but the impact of them was profound. The entire security team, from Ava to the two officers behind her, had been dismissed in an instant. Ava's jaw tightened as she realized the truth. She had been part of her own downfall, and now, the consequences were inescapable. The gate behind him was finally open, but Marcus didn't move. He stood still, his eyes fixed on the mansion that loomed before him. A place he had built, a place that had been his sanctuary. It had started as just an idea, a vision, a dream, and now it stood as a testament to everything he had overcome. But in this moment, standing at the threshold of that very home, he didn't feel the triumph he had expected. What he felt, instead, was a quiet, simmering reflection. The anger he had initially felt when Ava's actions had challenged him had long faded, replaced by something deeper. He wasn't angry anymore. He was simply tired. Tired of having to prove himself. Tired of being judged by people who never bothered to see beyond the surface. Tired of being underestimated because of how he looked, how he dressed, or where he came from. He had worked his entire life to build this house, this life, brick by brick, step by step, and now, here he was, standing at the gates that should have welcomed him in. Yet, despite all the success, all the accomplishments, he had been forced to prove his worth just to walk through his own front door, to show someone that he belonged. He let out a slow breath, his gaze scanning the yard in front of him, but his mind drifted to memories that had little to do with the mansion or the gate. He thought back to his childhood in Southside Chicago, to the years of struggle, of being told he didn't belong, to the times when people had looked at him and thought he was just another statistic, another person doomed to fade into obscurity. He had been underestimated then, and he had been underestimated now, but this time, it was different. This time, he hadn't shrunk. This time, he hadn't apologized. This time, he had stood his ground. His life had taught him that power didn't need to shout. Power wasn't about flexing muscles or making noise. Power was about presence. Power was about standing still when everyone around you was trying to move you, trying to shake you. Power was about knowing your worth and not allowing anyone, not even a security guard at your own gate, to tell you otherwise. He turned slightly, his attention now drawn to the growing crowd gathered outside the gate. The situation had turned into something more than just an interaction at a security checkpoint. It had become a spectacle. People had begun filming, their phones raised high to capture the moment. There were murmurs, whispers of disbelief, of recognition, as more and more bystanders took in the scene unfolding before them. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, but instead of shying away, he stood a little taller. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something bigger, something that transcended him and reached into the lives of everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. because of how they looked or where they came from. This was about dignity, about standing firm in the face of bias and prejudice, and about the power that came from not letting the world dictate your worth. He knew that he had a choice now. He could walk inside, retreat to the safety of his home and his wealth, and let this moment pass quietly. Or he could say something. He could use this moment to say something that would resonate beyond the gates of his mansion, something that would echo in the hearts of everyone watching. Slowly, he turned toward the crowd, his calm expression unchanged, but his presence now filled with purpose. He took a step forward, his voice carrying across the quiet morning air. "Everyone here, everyone watching, knows what this is about," he began, his words deliberate, each one carefully chosen. "This isn't about a security guard doing her job. This isn't about a misunderstanding at a gate. This is about respect. This is about how society has a habit of judging people before they ever take the time to see them. It's about how we're all too quick to dismiss someone based on how they look, or what they're wearing, or where they come from. We think we know their story, but we don't. We don't." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air for a moment, allowing the crowd to absorb what he was saying. He could feel their eyes on him, the quiet tension building. But he didn't falter. He wasn't speaking to them for applause. He was speaking because he needed to. "We all face adversity," he continued. "We all face moments where the world tries to tell us that we don't belong, that we're not good enough, that we need to prove ourselves. But here's the thing, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Not to your neighbor, not to your boss, not to the security guard at the gate. The only person you need to prove something to is yourself. You need to know that you belong. You need to own your space, because no one has the right to take that away from you." The words felt like they were more than just a speech. They were a call to action, a call to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, a call to stop shrinking in the face of adversity and start standing tall in the face of judgment. "I'm not here to fight," Marcus added, his voice quiet but resolute. "I'm here to remind you of your worth. I'm here to tell you that no matter what anyone else thinks, you don't need permission to be who you are. You don't need permission to walk in your purpose. All you need is to remember, presence is power, and no one gets to erase you." He paused again, allowing the words to sink in. The crowd remained silent, some still filming, others nodding in agreement, but all of them listening intently. Marcus looked around, meeting the eyes of those who had gathered, and then turned back to the security gate, to the mansion that loomed behind him. Ava, still standing near the control panel, was now staring at him, her face pale, her hand still clutching the radio, as if it could somehow bring back the control she had lost. But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He had already moved past her dot as Marcus took a step back toward the gate. The crowd began to shift, some murmuring among themselves, others cheering quietly. The tension that had filled the air just moments before was now replaced with a sense of quiet awe. The man in sweatpants, the man who had been underestimated and humiliated, had turned the situation into something much bigger. He had used the moment to speak truth to power, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his place. Marcus stepped through the gate, his posture still straight, his presence undeniable. The gate, which had denied him entry just moments before, now seemed to open with a sense of inevitability, as if it knew that Marcus didn't need its permission. He walked through, not because he had to, but because he always could, and as he entered his home, leaving the crowd behind, he knew that this moment, this small, quiet victory, was more than just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. It was about the power to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to never let anyone erase who you were. Legacy, Marcus thought, wasn't just about what you leave behind. It was about what you refuse to let anyone take away while you're still here.